Shanti, and greetings of peace. I'm sitting here in a cloudy New York City, and we are told to expect a full-blown snowstorm by midnight. So hi, everyone. Sitting in a cloudy city, expecting a snowstorm. On behalf of the Brahma Kumaris, Office to the United Nations, and the International Day of Yoga Committee, I welcome you to this heart-to-heart conversation on love for God and love thy neighbor. As Vice Chair of the International Day of Yoga Committee, I was asked to reach out to our BK community worldwide and to invite articles grounded in spiritual and yogic values on the subject of love for God and love thy neighbor. They wanted to include these articles in a section of a magazine they were preparing called Light on Light magazine. I reached out, I got all these articles, but what I didn't expect that all the articles submitted would be included in the publication. And so I was pleasantly surprised when the BK submissions were published. So our panelists today are those who wrote some of those articles that were submitted, and our discussions are our young close friends. And together they will engage us in this timely subject, which is so relevant during this period of the pandemic and a time ridden with anxiety, with worry, with concerns. And so I hope that we will all engage in the conversation and we will leave with new insights of what's needed from us as individuals and the collective in our world today. The inspiration for today's conversation came from our dear friend, Denise Cotto. Denise called me earlier this year to wish me Happy New Year. And then she said, why don't the BKs host a conversation, bringing together some of the authors of the articles in a conversation. And at the same time, you can have a launch of the magazine. And my immediate response was, what a brilliant idea. So here we are, Denise's inspiration and the reality of all of us being together. However, the one missing today is Denise herself. Due to a sudden illness of her mother, she's unable to be with us, and she sends her heartfelt apologies. I know how much Denise was looking forward to be in today's conversation. So let us send our best wishes and pure feelings to Denise's mother for a speedy recovery, and to Denise herself, let's send lots of love. So in order to bring Denise's voice into this room today, I would like to share a message she sent out on the release of the magazine, and I'll read that message. She says, Namaste. On behalf of the International Day of Yoga Committee at the United Nations and our publishers, I'm delighted to announce that the 2021 special edition of Light on Light e-magazine is now online. It's my great privilege to have gathered so many remarkable contributors to share their wisdom and experiences. You will find articles from renowned yoga masters, the executive board members of the Yoga Day Committee, our NGO colleagues, yoga practitioners, and friends. May you find these offerings uplifting and comforting. In the magazine, there's a tribute section dedicated to some of our very close friends who have transitioned to the other side and to whom we pay honor for their friendship and contributions in creating a better world. One such featured person is Raj Yogini, Dadi Gulzar. We are proud to have known her and the others featured, and feel you will be too. Please share this issue of Light on Light with those who may benefit. Blessings, Denise Scotto. And so with those opening remarks, I now invite Judy Rogers to lead us into the conversation. Judy.
So hello, everyone. Welcome, and apologies for a late start. It always seems no matter how many rehearsals you have, there's some little glitch. So we apologize, and we hope that our Spanish guests are getting translation. We'll look for a message if that's not the case. So we're going to talk about love today. Love, all the world needs, right? There's a lot of love, and we're talking about love for God and love for good and love thy neighbor. Maybe that's the hardest part of all this. So I want to tell you how this will work. We're going to have two panels. Each panel has 3 people on it. And then after the panel speaks, we're going to invite 2 discussants. The discussants are from the youth category of age. And then we're going to open up and invite comments from you, which you'll need to send us through the chat. And then after that, we'll tell our first panel goodbye. They're the ones love for God. We'll welcome the Love Thy Neighbor panel, and we'll repeat the same process. And hopefully we'll have a good amount of time at the end to hear from you. So let's get started. I want to welcome our first panel, Sharona Stillerman, Jacqueline Kambata, and Eric Larson. So let me tell you a little bit about these people before we hear from them. So Sharona holds an MA in adult education. She's been a practicing Raj Yogi for 38 years, and she coordinates the Brahma Kumari's activities in Israel. So welcome, Sharona. And then we have Jacqueline Kambata. And Jackie is a social entrepreneur. She's the founder of Kambata Designs, which engages in addressing issues of gender equality, education, and poverty. Welcome, Jackie. And then we have Eric Larson. Eric is a practicing Raj Yogi for over 35 years. He's the BK rep to the UN. He is a BK rep to the UN and founding member of the Long Island Multi-Faith Forum. I'm just going to say that all of these people have been modest in their bios. I could go on and on. So, all right. I'm going to not respond to the Spanish interpretation hand up and assume our tech team will do that. And I'm going to start with the question. And Sharona, I'd like to start with you. So you mentioned in your piece that humanity is coming apart at the seams. And so I wondered if you'd say a little more about what does it mean? What does it feel like on the inside? We know coming apart at the seams from the headlines, but what's the inside business about coming apart at the seams? And then let me connect that with another question. How does love of God help us in a moment like this? Love for God, help us in a moment like this when we're coming apart at the seams? And you need to unmute.
Thank you very much, Judy and Gayatri, and also Denise. It's a very lovely gathering that's been created, and I'm very grateful to be here and explore this subject because surely it would be the most important. I think coming apart at the seams is this feeling that the rug is being pulled out from underneath our feet. What we had used as our framework for reality, sense of security, confidence, self-esteem has been kind of slowly eroding away in a very subtle gradual process, which many of us wouldn't have been aware of until, say, the corona, which put up an incredible kind of mirror for us. And I would also say that a disconnect between us all and even in our own selves became visible. It was there before the corona, but the corona really made us see it. And personally, I was experiencing all of these things before I started my spiritual path. And it only started calming down, and broken pieces started coming together only when I discovered God and discovered new definitions of God and gave him a chance, you could say. And that's when everything started coming back together again for me, and the rug was put back underneath my feet, and reality took on a new safety and meaning. And I felt I could move forward in my life as if things were coming together versus things falling apart.
So I want to ask you just the obvious question. How does one find God and have that experience? I mean, something happened, you were blessed, or you had some great fortune, but what does someone do if they're looking? How do they find that?
I was definitely blessed. It was huge fortune because I wasn't looking for God. I was looking for truth. I was looking for happiness. I think if you're sincere, and I think that's one of your qualifications for this kind of blessing, you just have to be really sincere in that search. Because between my natural distance from God, I was very suspicious about the whole concept of God, very reluctant, I'm sorry to say. And then my arrogance, between those two factors, I shouldn't have had ever any experience of God. But in the end, I think it was his mercy, his kindness. He took pity on me, basically, I feel, because when I started my spiritual study with the Brahma Kumaris, everyone around me was having these marvelous experiences, and I wasn't having any experiences at all. And I think he took pity on me, basically, and said, this poor girl is never going to make it on her own. And so he really did a number on me.
And so you found God, and then you began something, and whatever the broken pieces were started to come together. Was there a signal to you that things were getting better? Did something happen that told you things were beginning to clear?
Well, first of all, my first experience of God was extremely clear and visible and life transforming. I was in London at the time, and it was in the middle of winter, and the sidewalk even was so icy. But leaving that place where I had my experience, I literally was jumping up and kicking my heels for joy. And the people who were with me kept saying, don't do that, you're going to hurt yourself. But I entered a high, which basically I feel I never came down from since.
Okay.
Happier. You get happier, that's a sign that it's working.
That's very powerful. Okay, so I want to move to Jackie. Jackie, in your article, you cited a Rumi quote. And the quote was, "The wound is where the light enters you." And you said it's God's light. And it reminded me of a similar line in a Leonard Cohen song. There's a crack in everything, and that's how the light gets in. And so I'm wondering, especially in light of what we just heard from Sharona about how broken that she was feeling, can you explain this relationship between our woundedness and our experiencing the light of God's love?
Yeah, and I loved what Sharona said, that reality takes on a new meaning. when we have an experience with God, when we have a relationship with God, whatever that relationship and the form of the relationship looks like. And for me personally, my personal narrative is that some years ago, I had a stroke, and during that time, the stroke was in the pons area of my brainstem, and there's something called locked-in syndrome that often happens with that, and which is complete paralysis. And I was sitting there thinking, is this going to be my life? And I was sort of going in a vortex of despair. And the only thing I knew to do at that moment was to pray and to invoke God. And one of the things that happened during that moment is the sort of a process of surrender that started, because I didn't know what the outcome would be. I didn't know whether I would be able to move again. And so I just completely and totally, bit by bit, surrendered to God with the notion that whatever happened, I knew that I would have the strength to deal with, that God would give me the strength. And part of that was a whole shift of my reality, something like Sharona was talking about, that I could choose the path of despair that I did not want to live in, or I could choose the path of surrender and this communion with God. And I think that really shifted my mental model of what it is to commune with God and have a joyful attitude as opposed to one of despair.
So is it then that in our the vortex of despair, or Sharona talking about brokenness, is it that do we hit a point of like humility, or is there some place we get to where suddenly we're open like we weren't before, or is it that God hears us somewhere and says, as Sharona said, I'm this poor soul. What happens? What's the connection between the low place and the high place?
I think, when, and I'm sure many people can relate to this, when you experience something in life that is unfortunate or devastating, that we connect other souls who have experienced the same thing, whether they're just in our mind or people whom we know. It develops a link, a connectedness. And I think the depth of compassion increases. The depth of kindness increases. I think that for me personally, it allowed me to have a broader horizon of my love for humanity and for myself and for God in that very moment.
Mm. So there is something here. This is interesting, isn't it? That there's something there between, what's that line? The darkest time is right before the dawn, or it's more eloquent than that. But there is something to being in a place where you really feel very low, and then finding that.
I think so. And the low point and the stillness of that, allowing yourself to experience it. Lao Tzu said, the mind that is still, the whole universe surrenders to. And I felt that very palpably during those times.
That's actually very encouraging, isn't it? That people shouldn't give up, especially when they're at a place that feels very, very dark, very lonely. That's the time when they actually could be hopeful that something they had never even dreamed of could happen. So yeah, that's beautiful. All right, thank you for that. That's lovely.
Pleasure.
So Eric, I want to turn to you. You made a connection between love of the self, love of God, and love of my neighbor. So my question is, what's the connection between love of the self and love of God? And then I've got a second question. I'm going to hook them together. You raised a question in your piece. Can I know everything about myself and still see only good? How does love for God help us to see only good in ourselves? So 2 questions, and I'll repeat it if you need, but
Yeah, you could repeat those. They sound like great questions.
you don't remember writing this, do you? All right, let me give it to you one more time. What's the connection between love of the self and love of God? That's question 1. Let me just, and then I'll give you the second one after you respond to
Okay.
that one.
Want to respond about that because in my upbringing, there was a very famous that you should love, and I'm going to bring the neighbor in here, love your neighbor like yourself. And I had always interpreted that or been guided to understand that we have to treat our neighbors well. Okay. But later on, or deeper understanding would have brought the fact that love thy neighbor like themselves implies that we have to love and know ourselves first, because we can't give love, we can't act with love to somebody else until we've kind of incorporated that, understood that, and overflow with that. And so that sense of how I want to be and how I want others to be, I have to do that first. And so that love of self kind of comes from an acceptance of seeing myself as lovable. And with that understanding, love of God, there's a question that was posed in history that I find very profound, and it's a relationship that we choose. Do you love God or do you fear God? And so I have chosen to go with the first, that's a sense that God loves me, and I would want that to be the relationship. And so there's a closeness that comes, and there's a power that comes. And when I have that for myself, then I can share that with others. And therefore, that's kind of the continuum. God loves me, I love my neighbor, I love God, I love you all that.
All right, so I want to dig a little deeper on this one. So what if I know something about myself that isn't very lovable?
Yeah. Do you want to talk about it now?
Yeah, I want to talk about it now. So I know something about myself that isn't very lovable, and that if other people knew it, they wouldn't love me either. It's either bad feelings I have or something I did or whatever, and I'm having trouble loving myself. You proposed this question, you offered this question, can I know everything about myself and still see only good? How would I do that? How would I see only good, knowing everything about myself? And how would my love for God help me in that?
Yeah, my understanding of that process now is to take an elevated awareness of self. And one way to describe that is the kind of fundamental basics of what I've been practicing and thinking about is how I identify myself. And do I identify myself with the things that I have done, things that I have said, mistakes that I've made? Because everybody has done that. And if I have that as my self-consciousness or my self-identity, then it's very heavy. But if I'm going to have an awareness that I am truly good, that there is something peaceful and lovable about me, and everything else is additional, then the process is forgiving, accepting, understanding, and then letting that go. And one of those things that I think works for me is to say, well, if I do my best, if I recognize that there's a deeper truth about myself, that I'm a spiritual being and that I've got these qualities, then yeah, I've done things that didn't work out the right way. I might have said things, I could have felt bad, but that is something that is not me. And so making a distinction between who I am and what I've done is a very powerful mechanism that allows me to let go of stuff that might be heavy in other ways.
Okay, that's nice. I see what you're saying. Who I am versus what I did. Okay, fair enough. All right, I want to invite the discussants in. So I want to make room on the screen for Jonathan Riopel. and for Roslini Ubines. There you are. Welcome, Jonathan.
Hi everyone, Om Shanti.
Om Shanti. And is Roslini coming on? So there she is. Okay. Hello, Roslini. Welcome. All right. So let me tell everyone who you are. So Jonathan is the author of a book, Success Has No Age. He is a life coach since 2014. He's the founder of Liberta Coaching, and he's forgiving my bad non-French accents here. He helps people to manage their relations to self, others, health, career, finances, and God. Earlier, he studied kinesiology, and he's now a student in theology at Laval University in Canada. And Roslini is the youth representative of the National Spiritual Assembly of the Baha'i of the U.S. to the UN in New York, right? So welcome to both of you. You've been listening to what you've heard here from these panelists, right? And so I just want to invite you to either if you want to ask one of them a question, or if you want to just reflect or elaborate on something you've heard, this is a good time to do that. Either of you.
I don't know how many time we have, but I have a complete page here for you.
All right. Well, why don't you start? And it's something like 5 minutes. I'll nudge you and give Roslini a chance.
Do you want to start, Rosalie? Okay. Maybe my first question would be for Sharona. I see myself also as a seeker of truth, and I found God, me too. And I would like to hear you about how do you explain that we find God when we are seeking for truth? How do you make that link?
You know, one way that I have resolved this challenge of making tangible what is essentially very intangible is to think about things like love, think about things like truth as a certain quality of energy, certain quality vibration. I mean, it's not, I interact with those concepts exclusively at the level of, you know, a logical mind, energy, vibration, but that's the way I approach it. And truth is a very, very high frequency energy. God is a very, very high frequency energy. And either I have an encounter with God, which exposes me to all sorts of truths because it's on the same wavelength, or vice versa. God is the embodiment of truth. I mean, he's really living it. And so in that relationship, you begin to understand, like, for example, my experience was, I was seriously beginning to doubt that goodness was a good idea. It didn't seem to be worth it, all the effort to be good. You know, people who were not good, clearly not good, were getting ahead. In my field, I was in education, and in the world, politics, religion, science, so much corruption. So I was really at a point where I was seriously beginning to doubt the hype on goodness. But my experience, that first experience with God, and then the continuing relationship, the cultivation of that relationship has absolutely restored all my faith that goodness does win in the end. And we have for our, as a model, this relationship with God to really reinforce for us all the virtues, all the qualities, all the principles, and how when they become really clean, they work. They've stopped working because they're not clean.
Thank you very much. I feel the baby BK inside of me is taking maturity now.
Rosalini, do you wanna weigh in here?
Okay, I have like something I want to share, so I'd rather for my 5 minutes.
Do you want to wait a minute and let Jonathan ask a follow-up question? Okay, go ahead, Jonathan.
Okay, cool. Jackie, you talked about this room where the light can find its path inside of us. I think it's really clear that the light is God, but can you talk to me a little bit more about that room? Where is it? Where's that room? How do you feel that room, and how do you feel the connection between the room and the light? And finally, how you admit it, or I don't know if I can say that in French, how you give yourself the right to open that door, because sometimes the door is closed. And I would like to know what kind of room do you have, so I can maybe decorate mine like yours someday.
Well, that room is something so for me, I experienced something lately that took me out of that room. And I think, the way that I find my way back in is similar to what Sharona was talking about in terms of our feelings. So the feeling of love, the feeling of compassion, the feeling of kindness, all of these feelings bring me to God. And, they are virtues that we all hold as human beings. And many, many years ago, I studied something called heart math, and they gave you a process whereby you would think of something or an animal or a human that you really loved, and you felt that. And as you call that into your being, we were asked to talk about the consequences of that in our worldview, so that even if we were having a bad moment, how can we shift our consciousness so that we hold a different reality? And so for me, it's feeling those feelings to bring God into my consciousness.
That's very nice. So, Rosalini, can we invite you in now? Rosalini, you want to unmute?
Yes, sure. It's more that I've been reflecting deeply upon what the three of you have said, and Jonathan's questions are really triggering me to go in a particular direction. And we're talking about love and God's love, but I'm hearing a lot of challenges that each of you have gone through your own individual distinct challenges. And if you don't mind, I'd like to share this one Baha'i quotation that has been very powerful for me. And it just resonates with this conversation. And it's something that I think about, that it comes to mind. And I'll just read it for those. The more difficulties one sees in the world, the more perfect one becomes. The more you plow and dig the ground, the more fertile it becomes. The more you cut the branches of a tree, the higher and stronger it grows. The more you put the gold in the fire, the purer it becomes. That is why in all times, the prophets of God have had tribulations and difficulties to withstand. The more often the captain of a ship is in the tempest and difficult sailing, the greater his knowledge becomes. Therefore, I am happy that you have had great tribulations and difficulties. Strange it is that I love you, and still I am happy that you have had sorrows. So that is from Abdu'l-Baha, who's the son of Baha'u'llah, the prophet founder of the Baha'i faith. And thinking about this quotation and thinking about your individual stories and your individual articles, is there one tangible nugget of wisdom that you have gained through your difficulties that you can share with us that can kind of help us find God, see God, and commune more actively with God?
Shall we throw that question to Eric, since the other two have fielded a question before? Eric, say it one more time, Roslini. The questions for Eric.
Is there a tangible nugget of wisdom that Eric has learned in his life through this difficult time that he's endured that has helped him reach God that he can share with us, that can help us also in our journeys to get closer?
Nice question.
Very good question. Hope to have an answer to match. The nugget, I guess, that has helped me might be a little echo of what was said earlier, I don't remember, is that if I do my best, then I don't have regrets. I don't have to worry about anything, but I can always learn more. I can always learn from my experience, and then I will always be looking forward to that. If I know that I'm not doing something, then there's a limitation there. There's a weakness that comes in there, and it becomes a burden. And so anything that I want to accomplish, if I do my best, whatever that turns out to be, and whatever the results are going to be, I should be satisfied, but it doesn't mean I'm content in that result, but I can try more, strive more, learn more. And so that seems to be very freeing. So I hope that's a big enough nugget.
So you're kind of saying, even if we've erred, we don't beat ourselves up about that, right? We say, okay, I did my best. I understand I could do better next time. But you stay with yourself as sort of a companion to yourself and the thing. That's kind of what you're saying, yeah?
Yep.
Yeah. Very rich. Let me ask if there's anything from the audience. Let's open up and see if there's anything coming in the chat that we want to add to our conversation. And we have people who are supposed to be conveying things here to us. So let me just see if there's anything that anyone's sending in. Okay, I see a lot, but I'm not sure that I want to sort through it all. So I need a little bit of help. Besides which, I hope those of you listening in Spanish are getting something. So, all right. So we've got a little bit more time. Does anyone else want to take a run at Roslini's question about how it's, that question is a little bit like the one you raised, Eric. How do we love ourselves? How do we accept ourselves when we know we have made mistakes? How do we not get disheartened? There's a funny thing going on here in the conversation. On the one hand, Sharona said, and Jackie said, that in moments of great disheartenment, where either we've had a real setback, or we've made a big mistake. Ironically, that may be the moment when God touches us. And yet, on the other hand, that moment of great disheartenment could be the time when we stop looking, because we're so sad, we're so set back that we give up on ourselves. So you've kind of teed up this funny moment about what do we do when in these dark night of the soul, can we sustain ourselves through that and stay hopeful? So let me just offer that question back to anyone on the panel.
Myself, I could say that actually, whatever nuggets I would be working with, I like that word, Roslini. Whatever nuggets I would be working with, they change over time. And I've come to feel that they have to change, either because the things I have to look at in myself keep changing. And for the most part, they get a little bit more deadly, a little bit more deeply ingrained. And so I need a nugget that goes deeper. But where I see it's all been hitting for so long is really to trust that there's a much larger plan unfolding. And there is a person, there is a being in charge of that plan. God really exists. And as much as I can keep myself on that same frequency, everything's going to be all right. I'm going to be all right. And it's like keeping myself on that same frequency is an aspect of letting go of thoughts which are of a caliber which don't reflect that kind of trust and faith in goodness. Thoughts and feelings. Just let them go and work with what I call wisdom-based faith, not blind faith, but spiritual paths should introduce us to this larger plan unfolding and make us very confident that it's much bigger than anything I can handle or any of us in any one country can handle, maybe any of us humans as children of God. But that's okay because he's here and he's going to make it happen.
Nice, Sharona. Jonathan, one more thought or question from you before we move? You need to unmute. Yeah,
a tiny one. I think it's really interesting to pay attention to the word "for" in the sentence "love for God." Mm-hmm. And I'd like to ask you people, maybe Jackie or Eric, how important it is to I don't know how to say that in English. Sorry, I'm French.
French.
I think you understand what I mean. If I switch the word "for" by the word "from" or "to," it's another meaning. And I was telling myself, if I had only 1% energy left, what will I do with that? Will I give it to God in the way I love for God, or will I take that 1% energy left to ask Him to love me? What would I do?
That's such a good question, Jonathan.
And I think right now at this moment I will try to love for God, because I think it's really rich what He gives us back when we really love Him. And that's what I think right now.
Jackie, love for God?
Gosh, it's a big question. It's also a personal question, I think. It's for me, it happens simultaneously. Love is such an expansive emotion that as soon as I express my love, it's almost as if I feel the love coming back in bucket loads. And it's also like tuning a frequency. It's like tuning a radio frequency. Oftentimes we go through our day with a certain cadence and a certain amount of busyness that we do. And often for me, I know that the busyness creates a distraction to my love for God. And so my frequency is a little bit off. But when I sit in meditation, that frequency that the love I have for God, the trust, the faith is very strong, very direct. And so my cadence in life is how I increase those moments of frequency that I have, that I can tune in to my love for God.
That's very beautiful. All right, everyone, you've been lovely. You've really, really been lovely. So I want to thank the first panel and the discussants for a really beautiful conversation. And then I want to invite the second panel to come. And while our tech people are making the switch, let's just take a moment of silence together. So inviting our second panel on. Second panel is Love Thy Neighbor. So I want to invite Charlie Hogg to join us. Good morning, Charlie.
Good morning, Judy.
Charlie's in
Lovely to be
Australia.
with you.
He's in Sydney right now, right? Are you in Sydney?
That's correct. Yes, I'm in Sydney.
Where it's what, 7-ish in the morning, something like that?
It's a little bit before 7 a.m. at the moment.
So we're in
Saturday
rough-
morning.
in
We're
rough
already in Saturday.
breakfast, right? Saturday morning. So Charlie, and let me invite on Kala Iyengar. And then I'll introduce all of them once we get them all up. There's Sister Kala. And then let me invite on Dipti Naran. And Dipti is in South Africa. So for Dipti, I'm thinking it is about, is it 10 at night for you, Dipti?
Yes, it's
What-
just about 10 o'clock.
What good sports you are. Okay, so let me introduce these panelists to you. So Charlie Hogg is a meditator for over 45 years. He's a speaker and a retreat leader internationally. He coordinates the Brahma Kumaris activities in Australia. Kala Iyengar is a pediatrician by training and a spiritual teacher by passion. She coordinates activities at Peace Village Learning and Retreat Center in upstate New York, where we're waiting for the snow to arrive. And Dipti Naran is a student and teacher of the Brahma Kumaris for the past 35 years. She's the center coordinator for the BK Center in Johannesburg, South Africa, and specializes as an educational consultant. She uses her meditation and spiritual practices to meet the needs of many challenges in Africa, and especially in education in a user-friendly way. So, Charlie, I'm going to start with you, and I'm going to start with a pretty basic question. Charlie, who is our neighbor in these times? And why are we having such trouble loving him or her?
It's a really beautiful question because one thing I love about this present world is the extraordinary diversity and what 7.9 billion human beings, 195 countries, 6,500 spoken languages, 4,500 religions, and they're my neighbor, the other. You know that language, the other, and it's like life is an interaction with such a variety of people, and that sense of neighbor, that word conjures in me that there's a connection, there's a bond, there's a sense of belonging. And I think one of life's great challenges is to find that sense of connectedness with the other, whatever that may be. And it seems, Judy, my feeling is it's more important than ever because the division seems to be greater and greater based on superficial things.
Right.
The neighbor becomes the enemy, unfortunately, rather than my sense of, that person who I have a natural, lifelong connection with.
Right. You know, you allude to this in the piece you wrote, and I want to take you back to that. In your article, you described the passion with which you joined the anti-apartheid marches as a young man, right? So I want to ask you, can you see yourself responding to injustice in this way today? How are you different now from that young man you were? And why do you think, however you are now, is a better response to discrimination and hatred?
Yeah, in those days, you know, when there was war, you know, this country was supporting America in the Vietnam War, apartheid, it really pressed a big button in me. And I felt quite passionate, but it brought up a lot of negative emotions. But, you know, now I feel my perspective has completely changed. And I would say, you know, you have a sense of compassion for those who are suffering. But I feel one of the greatest spiritual challenges is to have compassion for those who are causing the suffering. Mm-hmm. And I remember once I was in a program with the Dalai Lama, and someone was talking to him about the injustices that the Tibetans were experiencing in China. And he said, "How do you feel about it?" And the Dalai Lama says, "I have compassion, you know, for those people." And the man said, "I don't believe you. How can you have compassion for those who are causing so much suffering?" But he said, you know, he really expressed how important it was to offer compassion to all. And this was true spirituality. And I feel I've moved more into that zone to see a bigger picture and understand this sort of game that's being played at the moment.
Yeah, that's good, Charlie. That's really interesting. Yeah. All right, I'm going to come back to that. Kala, I want to ask you a question here. So in your written piece, you said it can be a turning point for the soul to be able to look into the eyes of a stranger and see light and love there. This is very connected to what Charlie said. To go beyond the looks and deeds of a person and to have a big heart. To go past mistakes and generate good wishes. This is the help the world direly needs today. So how do we get to this place where we can see past mistakes in ourselves and others and generate good wishes?
Yes. Tall order, right? Couldn't have done it if it was not for being a recipient of lots and lots of good wishes for myself. I think everybody knows, believes, and even practices, talks about it. We really absolutely cannot give anything that we haven't received, or we cannot do anything for the other that we have not experienced someone else doing for you. So I think for me, this energy of looking at the other person differently really came when I felt that I was being seen differently. And that was, of course, when I came to know God more intimately. Because the first part of getting to know God more intimately was really about getting to know myself more intimately. It was almost like I had to be introduced to myself and my worthiness and my potential and all of that had been forgotten. So once I had the experience of receiving that kind of a benevolent vision, understanding vision more than anything else, somebody that understood where I was, and I felt the goodwill of that one, it's almost like it elevates you, isn't it? From being feeling that you are not worth something, it allows you to raise your own bar for yourself and climb up that ladder of self-image. So I think it was a lot to do with finding myself in the eyes of God, what I would be. And because of that experience of love and good wishes, to be able to understand what the other person must be feeling too. And made so much sense. We always talk about don't cry over spoiled milk, or don't look at what's wrong, look at what's right. But how do you actually do it is the question. And so for me, that answer really came when we began to understand and practice spirituality in its most original form, and that is the practice of the self as a soul. I'm a soul, and the qualities, the worthiness of the soul, and by the same token also the other, the neighbor, as a soul, also beyond what I said, to be the differences and the color and the mistakes and the misgivings and all of that. So to really understand that we all have our own story when we go through life, but not to hold on to those different scenes and acts of the story, but to go back to its original beginning, the beginning of the story, so to speak. And the beginning of the story for all of us, as I understood it from God and from God's relationship with me, my relationship with God, is that it's very, very beautiful. Each one of us is a beautiful, sparkling star of light, living and conscient. So for me, that was a big turning point, to be able to see the other as a soul, as I was being seen as a soul by God.
All right. Okay, I have another question I'm going to come back to with you. I mean, you're into deep territory here. So, Dipti, you described your purpose as making a difference in the lives of those living in poverty, physically, emotionally, and spiritually, right? So I'd like you to start with, what is spiritual poverty?
It's firstly lovely to be here with everyone. I think for me, my journey grew a lot with children. I think a lot of what I discovered in life was through the eyes of a child. And very often, when I would look into the eyes of these children who are still so young and they have a life ahead of them, and yet you see eyes that look blank, eyes that look empty, eyes that look, energies that look numb. One cannot avoid, it woke me up very deeply in my journey in that way, to realize that one is the physical poverty or the emotional poverty, but spiritual poverty is really the essence of who we are. It's our life force. I am meant to be peaceful. I'm meant to be loving. I'm meant to be happy. I'm meant to have a life. I'm meant to be living. And when that light is not there, then there's spiritual poverty. So I think it's not anything higher or so complicated, but rather the essence of who we are. Mm-hmm. And I think when one touches the essence of who we are, and we see this is where humanity, or in my journey, really just showed me that something that is like our life force is missing. This is when I felt that I grew up in love. I grew up in such a beautiful environment. I was sustained from a child with so much of love that what had to be brought back into that journey was the very essence of who we are. And like Sister Kala was sharing, when we feel that soulful feeling, we realize who we are. And this is where we have to bring everyone back to. So this for me is spiritual poverty, where I've moved away from the essence of the very being that I am.
It's interesting. Were you in South Africa during the apartheid time?
I was born in South Africa. I received many hidings as a child. And that is when you asked the question to Brother Charlie. And I was thinking how my journey before I came to the Brahma Kumaris was so different in the way I responded to things. And it was like God came at the right time in my journey. And I remember Daddy Janki very fondly, because I remember telling her how I want to make a difference. And I remember the way she just looked at me and brought me back into a sense of clarity and balance, to look at things a little more deeply and more effectively and more powerfully. So yes, I was in the heart of it all, but I grew through it all. Yes.
It's a real, I think it's a crisis in our times, and listening to you all. I mean, whether it's specifically apartheid or it's any one of the leaders of so many Western countries and the choices they make. Forget Western, so many countries. And the indignation that we can feel, and feeling like when I have to do something, what is the do something? And what all of you are basically saying is that the something that we do is we elevate, we move to a higher ground, to be able to see. I love this thought about the Dalai Lama, the compassion. I mean, that's spiritual wealth, right? To be able to look with compassion on the Tibetans and understand that there is a brokenness there for that to happen. So it's very rich. All right, you all, I want to invite in our discussants and let them have some questions for you. So let me invite Praha Lamisa, and Rahul Iyengar. So again, these discussants are a younger generation from our panelists. I don't know if that'll change their perspective or not. So Praha is a social worker and the organizer. She is currently with Be the Match in the eastern region of the US to help save the lives of people affected by blood-related diseases or disorders through education, community outreach, and engagement. Half of her work is proactive, for example, going to university campuses and telling people how they can donate, and the other half is patient-focused. So welcome, Praha. And Rahul is a freshman studying business in college. The 3 words he uses to describe himself are family-oriented, trustworthy, and amicable. He has a passion for helping others and hopes to tie his passion to his career. So in listening, the 2 of you have been listening to these panelists, and you can either ask a follow-up question to any of them, or you can just reflect yourself. And either one of you, just whichever one of you wants to start.
Yeah, I can start.
Okay,
Rahul. Oh, sorry.
No, I was going to say, Rahul, if you'd like to go first, please.
Okay, perfect. Yeah, I just wanted to start by saying, thank you so much for all the responses. I think they were beautifully worded, and I think they really touched on an important point. And I just wanted to give my own reflection. How as times are changing and the presence of social media, obviously, I can speak to that as an 18-year-old. I think it's become a lot harder to remain soul conscious, as everyone's constantly comparing themselves to one another, and we often just get caught up in the body consciousness, and we get caught up in the flaws and sins of one another. So I think it's harder, but it's also more important now than ever to really reflect on, love for thy neighbor. And again, I think as Brother Eric had mentioned earlier, that starts with love for yourself. So I think once you're, able to just try to make that steps to becoming more soul conscious and really focusing on bettering yourself, I think then it's easier to really not focus on the flaws of others and just start to appreciate others for who they are. As obviously, like, everyone's more opinionated nowadays, and it's just hard with all the conflict in this world, especially given the COVID. So I think it's really important now more than ever.
That's interesting, Rahul. You bring in a couple of very current issues to complicate things, right? So COVID, we've all been locked up for a couple of years, and then social media, which is just its own world, isn't it? So how do we keep that subtle inner state that our panelists were talking about when we're just pulled out into the social media and the anxiety? So it's a really good question. Praha, what about you?
First, I want to say thank you. So grateful to be here. And I think one of the things that really I've been thinking about, I do take more of an optimistic approach in life. And I feel like given like where I am today, love thy neighbor is something that I get to practice and operationalize in the field. The basic message of the work that I do is, are you willing to save a life? And then, are you willing to save a life of someone you don't know? And if I could think of, if you could translate that to any other message, what would it be? And love thy neighbor is just such a great way of thinking about it. The work that I do is basically letting people know that you have an opportunity to help save a life, and to save a life in a way that if you have no medical impediments to doing so, it's an amazing opportunity. I will be posting about it in the chat box. That being said, knowledge and awareness is very important. And I think that that's one of the things that can really be expanded upon when we think about spirituality and loving thy neighbor. For me, I know through my research, my personal lived experiences, whether it's hatred or scarcity, a lot of it can be distilled down into power versus oppression. So understanding how we can help balance power, how we can think about material resources being one of the ways of spiritual giving and extending spiritual wealth as well. Because the more people have, and the more people have access, and the more people have opportunity, it's a lot easier to then tap into the subtle energies that we can find in stillness, which again, you can find even if you're on an empty stomach, but it is a lot easier when you aren't fighting for resources. So I just wanted to bring that in as well. And I just want to say also, for me personally, I know God resides within me. And I really feel that because when I think about engaging in the world or just things that seem insurmountable, I'm reminded every day that through collective action, through people bringing their brightest ideas and the warmth in their hearts, we can and we have and we must get so much done. The pandemic has been a true testament of showing us that, if we need to, we can rise to the occasion and make systemic, very broad, general, wide-scale changes. And if we can do that for something that is, deadly, that we must protect ourselves against, all it really takes is refocusing, re-inspiring everyone to come together to do the same for something like climate justice. So again, I would love to ask a question. Is there a recent global or local event, and not to lead because I just mentioned the pandemic, but is there a global or local event that's recently occurred in any of your lives that really embodied love thy neighbor?
Okay, panel. A recent global or local event that you felt really embodied love thy neighbor. Right?
maybe just a small reflection from my side. Thank you so much, Rahul and Praha. What I love is that when we're challenged and things don't go well and there's natural calamities or whatever may happen, sometimes the goodness, the compassion for each other and love thy neighbor emerges. And you may remember maybe about 2 years ago in Australia, we had these fires that went for months. They didn't stop. And they were pretty horrific in so many ways. I think the size of the UK was burnt out in the state in which I live. But the way that people extended themselves to support the neighbor was absolutely heart-touching. And it's a question for me why sometimes only when disaster happens does this beautiful human quality of compassion and reaching out to each other without judgment emerge. Why doesn't it emerge on a day-to-day basis? Sometimes I ask myself that question.
You know, Charlie, we've got a question from the audience that is similar to that, and I'm going to toss it in with this for whomever. Can someone share how they think we can get to the surrender without cycles of suffering that lead us there? That's a little bit like your question, right? Do we have to get to pandemics and crises in order to get to surrender to God, to love? Anyone want to? Charlie just posed that question. Anyone want to elaborate it, or just the answer is no, we have to have suffering. Sorry.
Maybe dip
I
your
think,
color.
yeah, I also think maybe it's how you perceive the suffering. For example, some of us may have a high threshold for our own suffering, but we don't want to see others suffer. I mean, our compassion is more for the other, whereas, I wouldn't have done something like that for myself. So I think, that also speaks for the quality of his soul, that you don't have to go through personal suffering, but you see the neighbor suffering, and that's enough for you to take action, that something should change. I don't know if this is the right place for it, but when Praha asked that question, I was thinking of the recent global worldwide Vati, so-called meditation intensive that we had for 3 days recently amongst the Brahma Kumaris as our gesture. First of all, for love, not just love thy neighbor, but love thyself, love God, love thy neighbor, all of the three together put in. So we had 3 days of quite a few hours of silence and reflection and meditation worldwide, coming together, on similar themes of love, themes of being angelic, themes of being, really soul conscious, and so on and so forth. And so I thought that's a recent example that probably wouldn't be cited in any newspapers or social media. But at the same time, I do feel those are the kind of actions, global actions, that need to happen for really emerging that energy of pure love that not everyone in the world may have, but few of us do have that. And so why not maximize that collectively and really motivate and mobilize others also?
It seems with this compassion for others, the more innocent the others, the more compassion we have. If it's animals or babies, right? We have lots of compassion. We've got another question that in the midst of difficulties, so in the middle, when the heat is on and you're really struggling, how do we stop and turn it around then?
So it's a very powerful moment, and I personally feel that it's human nature when things happen that you want to act. When things happen, you want to respond. And yet I found in my personal journey that when things were happening around me, it's like very often it's human nature to run into the danger or run. I remember when I was in school and I would hear the gunshots around the school, And it was normal tendency to run out. And often you'd run into the hands of the gunshots. And I used to play a game with the children in my class. And I used to say to them, let's play stuck in the mud or pose. And they used to look at me strangely, but the power is in becoming still in that moment. It's not about becoming frozen, it's about becoming present and becoming still. Because in that moment when you become still, you activate the resources that you truly have. You activate from within yourself that which you are potentially made out of. And
nice.
it's when that is activated, your response is very, very different. And when you act from that space, you're not acting for yourself alone. You act collectively. It's amazing how when people can go into panic, when they can go into a moment when there's fear or violence, and I've faced quite a few of these myself, that how we can be reactive. And at times people out of fear become selfish. And how when you in that moment can be powerfully still, you move forward and you move many forward with you, unharmed, protected, a feeling that we are together. It's amazing.
I love that, Dipti. I see that Andre has his hand up. Can we hear from Andre what his thought is? Andre Young?
He will need to be unmuted.
You know, we always end up talking about South Africa. I think it's the metaphor of our times, isn't it? We all, you know, it stirred us in such deep ways, and we just lost the Archbishop, right? Just.
Good evening. Thank you.
Good evening.
Thank you,
Andre.
Judy.
Welcome.
You know, I grew up as a child watching superheroes, watching Superman, Spider-Man. And I don't know if you ever came across the cartoon character He-Man.
He-Man.
He would pull his sword from his back and say, I have the power. And he would go into this transformative state of being able to solve all challenge. And it was quite interesting because Dipti Ben taught me how to be a superhero. She taught me a simple way of being, of how to create well-being, of how to unleash my powers. And the Brahma Kumari teach this 8 powers of the soul. And you know, it was quite interesting because I learned this in my 30s. I'm in my 50s now, but the last 20 years, life has become where I create well-being with power. I would draw very quickly. In the instant, I would draw from what's going on, all the chaos. And this is for the sister that was asking the question about how do we do this when there's no resources, Praha. I would draw, and then I discern. I think about what is as a soul. And then I realize that there's an abundance of resources. Because that's a fact. I can give you the empirical data like Charlie did of the number of religions, number of people, number of spoken languages, there's an abundance of everything. So you discern and you see the truth of what is. And thereafter I make a decision. And therefore I decide very gently and silently in my own mind on the truth, not on the mistruths that I've been fed. And you know, once I've decided, I then have the job of making sense of what I must let go of, because there's a lot of propaganda, false truths, fear, doubt, confusion that I constantly find as a superhero I have to let go of. And then I also quickly recognize exactly what courage I have to be able to do what I've got to do. Those are all processes happening internally.
So these
But 5 powers.
So Andre, these superheroes, it seems they all have this moment of stillness somehow that Dipti was talking about, right?
Yes, they've learned to relax. They've learned to concentrate, contemplate,
as opposed
and then realize and show up. But once these 5 powers have been exercised, 3 happen automatically. I'm finding that it's becoming autopilot. 1, I can adjust. I can really adjust to everything. I become flexible to everything. And 2, I can tolerate. I shouldn't use the word tolerate because the Brahmaki Marga used that, but it confused me initially. I should use the word, I have the power to have respect for all the diversity that is there. And then I cooperate. I cooperate with everybody, and everything I'm seeing in the world is where we are now at a place where the price we have to pay to create the better tomorrow is to cooperate. And to share the abundance that we have in everything. So be a superhero was what I was taught by Dipti Ben. And Praha, as you youngsters grow up and run the world, I hope you put on your superpowers and I have the power. Thank you.
Thank you, Andre. Thank you. We do have a couple of other questions, and because we started late, we are running up against our end time. So I just want to acknowledge the questions and thank those who have written. There have been some nice notes from you all just expressing that you're here. We have a nice question about how do we practically balance the personal and the global, which is big. And then we have another nice question asking, did the pandemic teach us something? Is there something we're supposed to understand about what happened, whether it has to do with getting along with each other, whatever. So I wonder maybe each of the panelists could just give us one sentence of guidance to close with, if you would. Charlie?
Well, in a sense, I feel this panel has been sort of an example of what we're talking about, because all of us come from such diverse places, listening to Dipti's experience, etc. But I just think it's so healthy to come together and listen, and that's a form of loving thy neighbor, to listen with a true heart and really reach out. To me, the greater gift for the other is a gift of goodwill and pure feelings. That vibration from my mind is priceless, I feel.
Thank you, Charlie. Kala.
Yes, my takeaway, giveaway, I think is really to afford yourself that quality time of soul space, soul conscious space, silence, stillness, which really allows for the true spiritual love of God to come in, and for us to also express that true love for humanity. And just a word on the love for good. There are many people that ask, isn't it enough just to be good? Why do we need God? And my answer would always be, yes, if we can really and truly sustain the good over time in this world, why not? But I doubt if we can. We really need that sustaining and supporting and an empowering presence of God in our lives to continue the good.
Thank you, Kala. Dipti.
To be actively silent, to be beautifully silent, and to have that openness of heart, because life around you is telling you many things. People around you are in need of many things, but only when you're present with yourself and you connect with God does it open capacity. And it is that silent capacity that is opened in God's presence that will be like a wave that will support those around us. So become very beautifully present and powerfully present. And what you will radiate will be what people around you will need. And you'll be able to touch them, no matter who they are, no matter where they come from, no matter how noisy their mind is. Your silence is like an injection that can reach them.
Thank you, Dipti. Discussants, panelists, you've been wonderful. Thank you so much. And thanks to everyone who joined us. We're sorry for the little bit of a late start and a little bit of a tangle with Spanish translation, but we hope you all got on board. Now we're going to close with a meditation. We won't come back on after the meditation. So closing meditation. Om Shanti.
With the current state of the world, I slow down. I know I need to step back and look within myself to see how I am feeling. To see if I am clear with what matters to me. I go within so the noise of the mind, so that the unfolding events around me don't take me away for what needs to be clear inside. Do I feel if there was stillness within? If there was true peace within my heart? If I felt that my heart was healing? It would help me feel different about myself. And it would also help me feel different about others. Every being is seeking for those same feelings. To be seen. The feeling of being connected. The feeling of peace. So much of these feelings are beyond words, beyond lines of separation. What do I feel is needed right now within myself? A thread that links us all together, links every being in this world. Beneath all that is visible, all that is tangible, that what connects us together a spiritual link between us love from the one, the divine, who truly heals our hearts, first beginning with mine, so that my heart can open and I can feel the connection that links each of us together. I can heal and help humanity move one step closer to what I envision.